Andrew Yang.
Energetic.
Smart as hell.
Math. Math? All right, I started this. Andrew Yang.
Oh, $1,000. That's the man right there. I like asking.
Winner.
The winner, yeah.
Our next guest is self-described entrepreneur Andrew Yang, who represents a community that's often ignored in national politics, Asian Americans, the fastest growing racial group in the country. But how does Andrew Yang want to be seen? He's got a pretty big group of supporters, and that includes conservatives. He sat down with Tucker Carlson on Fox News. He posed with supporters wearing MAGA hats. And conservative pundit Ben Shapiro has called him, quote, my boy. Yang has taken pride in his ability to win over disaffected Trump supporters. And some Democrats have even suggested that strategy may be the best road to the White House. Let's give it up for Andrew Yang.
Sir, I'm doing Dexter, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Pleasure to meet you.
Great to meet you guys. Hello, everyone. Hello, Des Moines.
You came ready. You came ready.
He came out hot.
I thought you might come out with a cap on.
He has his pen, though.
They did my hair for TV earlier today, so the cap, I mean, I have to do it again later.
Makes sense.
It's working. It's working. So let's get to it. So I know at some point in the next 15 minutes you're going to talk about giving money to a whole bunch of people, right? We're going to get to that.
He's rubbing his head.
But we have to address something first. Let's talk about the Yang Gang.
Let's get to it. So, there's people familiar with it in the audience, right?
Yes.
So you're unique among the entire field in that you have had a bunch of white supremacists who just have decided somehow that you're their guy. Now, it's different dealing with this as a candidate, dealing with it as a president. So how does a President Andrew Yang deal with the issue of white supremacy in America?
Well, first, I was stunned to hear that anyone who has any kind of hateful ideology in their hearts would support me, because I certainly don't look like the poster boy for white supremacy. But to me, we have to give Americans a path forward. I talked to Christian Picciolini, who's now an anti-hate activist who spent 12 years in a hate group. And he talked about how when he was a lost 14-year-old, someone in one of those groups reached out to him, and then he spent years there. And now he helps people get out. And what he said to me was that if a coach or mentor or teacher had reached out to him instead of the hate group, then he never would have spent those 12 years in this lifestyle that now he completely rejects. So the question is, what paths forward are we going to present to the Christian Picciolinis who are around the country who are lost? And if we have organizations and pathways forward in our communities, we can let people know that hate is not the answer and that we have better futures if we all actually see ourselves as part of a larger whole.
So what does that look like concretely as a president?
What that looks like concretely is putting resources directly into our communities to be able to fuel positive role models, nonprofits, religious organizations. Because right now, when you go to a nonprofit in a tougher part of the country, they almost always have less in the way of resources than if you go to some rich part of the country. And that's true of churches too. I've been to church in the richest parts of the country, and wow, can you tell that it's a rich church? Like, you walk in there and there are professional musicians and the whole nine, and you're like blown away. And then you go to a church in a beleaguered part of the country, and all of a sudden they have a fraction of the level of resources they need. So if we listen to the teachings of Martin Luther King, whose birthday we're celebrating today, he advocated a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans. And if you can imagine what an extra $1,000 a month would mean in the hands of each family and then multiplied by the families in a community, you would have a lot of that money go to local nonprofits and youth groups and religious organizations that would end up fueling many more positive paths forward for young people instead of having them just get lost and feel like they have no future.
I mean, I told you he was going to get to talk about giving money to a whole bunch of people.
I'm pretty predictable that way.
I mean, because I want to back up, because I want to point out that I started off with a question about white supremacy and dealing with that, this is something you've said is a problem in America, but we ended up with talk about handing people money. I mean, does handing people money fix racism?
Of course not. So as president, one of my top priorities would be to label white nationalist terrorism as its own category of terrorism and say, look, by the numbers, this is the most prevalent form of terrorism in the country today. And you can't fight something if you don't measure it. So that's something we need to do. But at the same time, if you have an environment of shrinking opportunities, then it's much easier to turn on each other. There's a mindset of scarcity that has taken over our country because 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and half of us can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. And in that environment, if someone comes to you and says, hey, blame these people, it's their fault, then you're much more likely to listen than if you feel secure and stable in your own future and the future of your children.
There are an awful lot of rich racists, though.
Yes, there are. But when you go to those environments, the racism looks a little different. Like it's not the sort of white supremacist violence that I think we're talking about right now. It takes more institutional forms, which is obviously not a good thing. I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah.
We need to try and combat racism at every level. But the fact is, if you put this money into our hands, it helps people of every background. It certainly helps communities of color who have systematically lower access to both capital, education, and resources. And it helps people in rural communities that right now don't feel like they have a path forward. So this is a solution that will work for all Americans, and it has the net effect of making it so that we can actually see each other as part of a larger whole and solve the bigger problems that face us all, like climate change.
So everybody gets $1,000 a month.
Everybody gets $1,000 a month.
Elon Musk gets $1,000 a month.
My friend Elon, who endorsed me, does get $1,000 a month. But in the plan, Elon would end up paying much more into the system, which he's totally cool with. Because when you talk to some of the most successful people in our society today, they realize that an environment where Americans feel like they're being left behind is bad for everybody. That this is not a situation where if you're at the top of society, you feel like giving something up is not in your own interest. Because for some of the folks I know in Silicon Valley, they're from the Midwest. They realize that we have to bring everyone along for the 21st century and feel like we're all participating in the innovation and progress.
So there are a number of black economists that have been talking about universal basic income as a potential solution for wealth inequality, the racial wealth inequality gap in this country for years. They've been championing this, actually. But a lot of those same black economists have described your plan as dangerous for the reason that the tax that you're proposing that would pay for this whole thing would disproportionately hit poor families harder, and that it could actually exacerbate the racial wealth gap in this country. And so you can't both be right here, right?
Well, in a vacuum, a value-added tax does end up falling on people who are starting out with less money. But the great thing about a value-added tax, which has been used in literally dozens of other countries, is that you can ratchet it up on things like artificial intelligence and yachts and luxury watches, and you can exempt things like diapers, milk, and toilet paper. Make it so that Americans who are just consuming things that we all consume just to live our lives are not paying more, and it's the folks that aren't going to feel it as much who are going to be paying much, much more into the system.
So specifically between yachts and, that's sort of a wide gap there, yachts and diapers.
Yeah, exactly. So what you do is you look at the average American who's just getting by and say, what are you spending money on? And say, well, the last thing we want to do is make that stuff more expensive. There's a joke that Willie Sutton, the bank robber, used to tell. Why do I rob the banks? Because that's where the money is. We have to go to where the money is. Like, where's the money going right now? It's the trillion-dollar tech company like Amazon that's paying zero in taxes. You go there, get the money, bring it back to our communities, put it in our hands, and build a trickle-up economy from our people, our families, and our communities up. But there are ways that you can make it fall more heavily on the people that are benefiting the most from today's economy.
I think one of the maybe cautions people may have about that is that rich people tend to be very, very good at getting away with not paying taxes that they're supposed to be paying. Poor people are often, they're not equipped to be able to do those sorts of things.
Well, that's one reason why other developed countries have put in this point of sale value-added tax that's really impossible to game. Because if you're selling to us and you're benefiting from our infrastructure and our marketplace, then you pay. That's why other countries have done this, because right now, our companies are outsmarting our tax system like right and left. They just park all the earnings abroad. They go through Ireland. That's how a company like Amazon or Netflix or Starbucks, some of which I like, obviously, I mean, we like these companies, but they're paying zero in taxes. And so other developed countries have already figured out that that's unacceptable. And if you put this tax at a point of sale, you can't wriggle out of it. But you're right. They are very smart. You got to do something foolproof.
So, Mr. Yang, this isn't your first ambitious program. Before you started your campaign, you founded Venture for America, which was a program that promised to send Ivy League grads to underprivileged areas like Detroit to boost the local economy. You promised to create 100,000 jobs. So far, 8 years in, you've created less than 4,000. And about half of those Ivy League grads have already moved away from the cities they were supposed to help. So your track record right now, in terms of promising something that sounds amazing, is not all that good. So how are we to look at UBI?
Well, I'm incredibly proud of having started a nonprofit that created thousands of jobs in Detroit, New Orleans, Cleveland, Baltimore, cities that are majority black. And the fact is that 100,000 job goal actually had a date attached to it that we haven't gotten to yet. So it's TBD whether we can get there in the time frame that we set that goal.
You think you can go from 4% to 100% in the next 5 years?
Well, it's possible after I'm president that we can do very, very big things in that time frame. But the fact is, I did this work and I realized, to your point, that the water level is going down, not up, in many, many communities. And that's why I'm running for president. Is I realize that entrepreneurship alone, I love entrepreneurship. How many of y'all want to be entrepreneurs? Entrepreneurship is phenomenal and makes the world go around.
That wasn't much of a response.
These people are trying to save the world.
They're here for the politics.
But entrepreneurship's not going to do the trick. It's not going to create enough opportunities in black and brown communities. The only way we're going to make opportunities flourish in these black and brown communities is by putting money into people's hands. That's why I'm running for president. I spent 7 years trying to do as much good as I could in these communities, very, very proud of it. But the truth is we have to go much, much bigger.
I mean, it sounds like you learned a lot working with VFA.
I did.
And which is great. I think there were a lot of people beforehand who probably could have told you, hey, man, look, parachuting a bunch of Ivy League grads into the hood might not fix everything. You might not get 100,000 jobs like that. Just like there are some people who are saying, listen, we've been studying UBI for years. The way that you're going about it might actually be damaging. And I mean, what happens if you become president? We run this grand experiment, and then a few years later, we learned a lot, but it didn't quite work out.
We told you, Mr. Yang, we told you.
Look, I'm a very, very data-driven guy, but I am 100% confident that putting $40 billion plus into the hands of black and brown communities every month is going to be a major positive. And if we learn things from it during that time that we can make it even better, I will be all for it. But I'm talking about the wholesale eradication of poverty in our society, which we should have done decades ago. It's only going to get worse. Median African-American household net worth is projected to go to zero by 2053 if we don't do something about it. Now, why is that? Because we're in the midst of this economic transformation, and we know who suffers most when you have a tidal wave come in. It's black and brown communities who have lower levels of resources to be able to respond to it. So we need to go big yesterday and start rewriting the rules of our economy to work for us, to work for you, to work for your families. We can talk about the way in which we calibrate the tens of billions of dollars that we should put into our people's hands right now, and I'm going to be all for it as president. First, we eradicate poverty as a foundation, and then we start building a beautiful structure on top of it.
We'll move on to another one here. You have a habit of making self-deprecating jokes about Asian Americans a lot. And the harshest criticism you've actually gotten about this is from other Asian Americans, making jokes about being good at math, making jokes about being good on tests, knowing a lot of doctors, things like this. I think there's an argument for these same stereotypes, which may be viewed as harmless or funny, that they come from the same place as the more sinister ones. Why keep doing this?
Well, I'm certainly very proud of being the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat. And it was an honor and disappointment to be the lone candidate of color on the debate stage the last time. I think that making light of these stereotypes and dragging them into the light is not a bad thing. I think Americans are smart enough to realize that if I say something about, liking math, that doesn't mean that the millions of Asian Americans out there all like math, and that by poking fun at these things that we can actually see them for how ridiculous they are. But when I talk to Asian Americans around the country, I'm happy to say that many of them are invigorated by my campaign and see that we have to do more to contribute to this country that has given, frankly, families like mine so much.
And I do want to point out here that we're speaking specifically about, things like Asians being good at math, Asians being good on tests, you're familiar, of course, with the model minority myth, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Which is more often than not, actually, almost always used when the black person, the brown person, is the other end of that coin, right? That Asian Americans are deserving of their status. Black people, there's something wrong with them. They're lazy, something like that, right? So there are two ends of this side right here, right?
Yeah, and the model minority myth obscures the vast diversity in the Asian American community because there are many, many people who are struggling at every dimension in the Asian American community. There are many ethnic groups within the Asian American community. So certainly, I don't think anyone believes that I think my experience or any offhand remarks I make somehow reflect the reality of millions of Americans from literally at this point more than a dozen different ethnic groups.
So I know you enjoyed talking to the two of us, but there are some audience members that would love to chat with you as well. Paula, who do you have first?
Hi, Mr. Yang. So we have Mitch. He's the co-founder of the Asian and Latino Coalition here in Des Moines. Mitch?
Welcome. Good afternoon, Mr. Yang. Welcome to see you. Thanks. It's good to see you again. Latinos polled in the 2016 presidential election stated that their top voting priorities were education and the economy. Currently, nearly two-thirds of Latino students end up in underserved community colleges and second-tier public universities, and only a small percentage attend one of the most elite colleges, according to the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce. Today, our economy is strong for the most affluent in our society, but Latinos make up nearly 30% of the total population living in poverty. What is your plan to deliver sufficient resources for our struggling community colleges and universities? And secondly, how do we address the racial disparities in our economy for brown and black communities? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mitch. It's okay if I stand? I'll just address you like this. It's work. I've got one son who's autistic and in a special needs school, and then the other one is in public school. So I believe that public education is the life's blood of our communities, and also super grateful to the work the teachers do every single day. Now, we have to do more for our teachers. So here's what we need to do. Number one, we need to pay teachers more. A good teacher is worth their weight in gold in terms of better educational outcomes for our kids. Number two, we need more teachers in the school so that they don't struggle with these high student-to-teacher ratios where they have to manage behavior and can't actually attend to kids' learning. Number three, we need to lighten up on the standardized tests. Did you all know that we popularized the SAT during World War II as a means to identify which kids not to send to the front lines? And today we're treating all of our kids like every year is wartime. Does that make sense? We have to let our teachers do their jobs and not treat our kids like they're all on an assembly line. They mature at different rates, they learn differently, and that's the way our school should be designed. Number four, 2/3 of our kids' educational outcomes are determined outside of the school. So that's parental time with the child, words read to them when they're young, stress levels in the house, type of neighborhood. We're putting our educators in an impossible position when we're saying teach our kids, and educators know, despite their incredible work, they can only control about 1/3 of our kids' outcome. And so what we have to do is work on the other 2/3 by putting money directly into the hands of the families and the parents. So if you have 2 adults in the house, you have an extra $24,000 a year. The odds of one parent spending time with that child during the formative years really, really higher, and much, much more possible to give that kid a real chance to learn. The other thing we need to do is invest in community colleges, technical, trade, and apprenticeship programs. About 1/3 of Americans will go to college, and only 6% of our high school students right now are in technical or trade programs. In Germany, that's 59%. Think about that gulf. So we need to invest in making those programs much more available to high school students so they all don't think that it's college or bust, because there are many, many jobs that are going to go unfilled right now because we're not equipping our kids for those skills that the marketplace needs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Mr. Yang, we have another question from Karen. So Karen, if you want to stand up. Karen is a professor at Iowa State University.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you for being here today. My question is about health outcomes, and I'm not talking about insurance coverage. I'm talking about Black and brown people who have insurance coverage, but yet when they go to the doctor or seek medical treatment, they end up with worse health outcomes than white people. You also find out, for example, that Black and brown people are more likely to develop and die of every single disease that the CDC keeps track of, with the exception of skin cancer and breast cancer. And in the case of breast cancer, even though African American women are less likely to develop the disease, they are more likely to die from the disease. So what will you do in your health plan to deal with these health disparities?
It's such an important question. I made mention last time I was on the debate stage that an African American woman is 320% more likely to die from complications in pregnancy and childbirth than a white woman in this country. And that stat horrified me as a human being, as a parent. And so I went looking and said, how the heck is that disparity so prevalent? And a lot of it is that doctors and medical professionals don't listen to Black women when they talk about what's going on with their bodies and their health. Another aspect of it is that apparently the stress levels for Black women are just higher throughout the years approaching pregnancy, and that ends up making them more susceptible to negative health outcomes. And that's not just for pregnancy, that's across the board. Unfortunately, it's just more stressful being Black in this society than it is being white. And so you have rampant health outcomes as a result of that. So there are a few things you can do, and you can't do it all at the federal level, but here are some things you can do. Number one, we have to train our medical professionals to listen to people of color when they talk about their health issues and problems, instead of just saying, like, I'm the doctor or a nurse, like, I know best. Number two, we need to invest in having more diversity and representation in terms of our healthcare professionals. Right now, we have a national doctor shortage in this country. Do you think we have a shortage of people who want to be doctors? No. But we've unfortunately kept the supply artificially low because the medical lobby wants to keep the supply low to make more money, honestly. So what we have to do is we have to expand those slots and make sure that people of color are taking those slots, so we have doctors that actually look like the people that they're serving in their communities. And then if they go and work in underserved communities, we have to forgive a lot of the student loan debt of medical professionals, because right now med school costs $200,000, and so after you come out, your natural course of action is to go to a richer, more affluent area and then serve those populations. So we have to attack this problem at the training level, at the source of medical professionals. But the big picture is we have to make it less stressful to be Black in this country. And a lot of the reason why it's so stressful to be Black in this country is that right now, everything in our society runs around the almighty dollar. And we're treating ourselves like we're all inputs into this giant machine. And we can all sense that we're scrambling to keep pace, and it's getting harder and harder. What we have to do is we have to take the boot off of our throats, say that economic value and human value are not the same things. We all have intrinsic value as human beings and Americans. And then we make it so that if you're growing up brown and Black in this country, you still feel like you can make ends meet, your future is secure, you're less stressed out day to day, and hopefully we can close the disparity between health outcomes of Black and white people in this country.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Mr. Yang. Also, what's next?
Mr. Yang, if you join us back here.
Come on back.
After that TED Talk, we appreciate it.
That was less than TED Talk duration.
So we have a challenge for you.
I like it.
All right. You don't know what it is yet.
I generally like challenges.
Okay. Well, this challenge is called the short answer. That face.
He's excited. He's ready to go.
So, the short answer is a segment in which you get 60 seconds to answer as many questions as you can. You get one pass. No one has passed yet. But
just keep that in mind.
Just keep that in mind. But remember, the title is the short answer. That's how you win.
What do I get if I win this thing?
President. That's what the audience is.
That's what I'm talking about. All right. Then I'm game.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. If you could be invisible, what would be the first thing you do?
Eavesdrop on the other candidates.
Okay. Fill in the blank. Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is
Humpty.
Pronounced with an umpty. All right. What was your worst job?
Busboy at a Chinese restaurant. I didn't qualify to be a waiter because my Chinese was too lousy. Sorry.
That y'all don't. Okay.
Jordan or LeBron?
Jordan, but LeBron could pass him.
When's the last time you smoked weed?
Past life.
What's the last TV show you binge watched?
I watched This Is Us with my wife.
What's your biggest fear?
That we don't eradicate poverty in the time we have.
What's a topic that you're embarrassed that you don't know more about?
That's a great question. Soccer.
And Jay-Z lyrics.
I guess so. I mean, I screwed that up just now.
So how did Mr. Yang do, folks?
Yay! I'm gonna be president!
Thank you very much, Mr. Yang. We really appreciate your time.
Sir, it's a pleasure.
Dexter, thank you both. Appreciate you guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you all. Down.
He don't want to go nowhere.
Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that